Welcome to the MyLifeInConcert.com podcast. I'm your host, Various Artists, and please join me as I travel back and revisit every live show I've seen from 1975 to the present. It's March 9th, 1982, and I've lost feeling in my toes. We're pressed up against the glass doors of Centennial Hall as minutes slowly turn into almost 2 hours of standing in the sub-zero cold. There's been an intense Canadian winter blizzard, and snow piles are everywhere. But the gig is still slated to go on. But will it? And when? I'm your host, Various Artists. It's the MyLifeInConcert.com podcast, and this is episode 16, concert number 10. And this episode is called Electricity, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, or better known as OMD, with Mettle. Centennial Hall, London, Ontario, Canada, Tuesday, March 9th, 1982. Welcome back, listeners, and welcome all new listeners. Now, this week in the podcast, I look back on the first of the new UK synth-pop bands to play here in London, Ontario, and that was Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, or OMD. And they were really the first of the synth-pop bands I really heavily got into. I'd loved Gary Numan's Replicas, but this, the first OMD album, hearing that really kind of triggered all that, and then there was the Human League. And anyway, so this was the first of those bands that I had been listening to actually come to London and play live. So I was pretty excited about this show. But it also came with the longest ever wait to get in to see a show, and in the dead of winter. It was because it was in the dead of winter and those circumstances that it was the longest wait to get in to see a show. Now, my pal special guest from Leeds, UK, returns. He was at the show. Now, we didn't know each other at the time, but as you'll hear in the podcast, in the interview we do in this podcast, that we kind of noticed each other at the show, and it was a year later that we met, but we were both there. He's back to share his memories once again, including an interesting story that I'm hearing for the first time in this podcast from him that involves waving OMD members in a restaurant. I'd just like to remind listeners to check out the MyLifeInConcert.com blog with the entry for this story featuring additional videos, the original ticket. It's really interesting, original ticket. I talk about that later. And details about the show I don't necessarily cover in this podcast, plus a corresponding OMD playlist that I've created for this episode. And there's lots of other blog entries for shows I've seen from the 70s through the 2010s, and you can listen to the other podcasts there as well. Also, please like, follow, and subscribe where appropriate with our Facebook and Instagram pages, and check out our YouTube channel with additional videos there, plus our Spotify playlists, and they all start with MLIC, so they're easy to search on. Now, in the previous episode, episode 15, on the Police Picnic 81 Festival in Oakville, Ontario, in August of 1981, and that festival with the Police headlining, but also the Specials, Iggy Pop, Go-Go's, Killing Joke, and more. That podcast is there to listen to. And I went that day for that show with my friend Lady B, and also Driver Guy, who I otherwise can't remember. And as I mentioned, that was my sole concert of 1981, which is a bit of an aberration in this story, because for those who have been following, you can see that I'm starting to see more and more shows. And that, as I said, is an aberration. And it wasn't until 1996 that I had another single concert year. 1982, though, is really kind of my transitional year, you could say, as a live music goer, because especially in the second half of the year, things really picked up, and then they just never stopped. And then I became much more involved in the local music community again. And so this is the year where things start to go pop and then bang. Now, I went to this show with Lady B as well, and our new friend, who I will call Le Chateau. Now, the concert took place at Centennial Hall in downtown London, and that's the place where we'd been to see the Ramones show in May of 1980, and there's a podcast for that, podcast number 3 in the series, and it was concert number 7. So I think I'm now just going to jump into the interview with special guests who has been joining me on many episodes as we are at a lot of the same gigs. And he's now in, well, Leeds, UK, I believe. Now you're in Cayley, I believe it is. And so let's cut to the interview. So in terms of orchestral maneuvers in the dark, how did you first hear about them?
I got the Organization album for Christmas from my sister's boyfriend, who sent it over from the UK, sent it to Canada. Mm-hmm. So I got that. That was the first time, and I thought, this is a weird name for a band. Mm-hmm. I thought it was going to be orchestra music. But I was pleasantly surprised. Right. So that was the first time I actually heard of them. Which is probably, is that the third or second?
That's the second album.
Yeah, so I hadn't heard them before that.
And it's interesting because that's, of the first 3, that's the one I don't know very well. I had heard of them and I knew of the name through the NME. And it was part of the reemergence of Liverpool right at the end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s. Uh-huh. And I always associate OMD with 2 things happening in Britain. One was Liverpool, because I kept reading about these 3 new bands from Liverpool, Echo and the Bunnymen, The Teardrop Explodes, and Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. So I knew of them through the Liverpool thing happening, but of course the Bunnymen and The Teardrop Explodes were very much tapping into that psychedelia. Meanwhile, there had been the explosion of the new electronic bands, especially the Human League and Throbbing Gristle. Those were the 2 I knew. And that was starting to grow, and I was starting to get into that. But it's interesting because the first electronic record from England I remember was Gary Newman's Replicas.
All right.
And the one after it, Pleasure Principle. But the first of the electronic albums I really got into was the first OMD album. I knew someone that had it, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. So when I think of the fall of 1980, I was playing the crap out of that first OMD album along with Closer, Joy Division, Bowie, Scary Monsters, and the Talking Heads. So I'd heard of them through that, and it's weird. It hits me now. That was really the first of the, well, there was Gary Newman, but I loved the OMD album all the more. And then Organization came out. That one I didn't get. So that's the one that you do. Did you go back and hear the first album, or did you know that, or?
I didn't hear the first album for years and years later. I don't think. I don't remember going and looking out for the first album after I got Organization. I think it was a long time after. I'd heard tracks, but I hadn't heard anything, not the full album, I don't think.
Because I know that we're going to be talking about Lady B, who you know who I mean, was at the concert. And she had Organization. It's weird because Cublet is the biggest OMD fan, and he has almost every disc except Organization. I don't think he has that one either. So obviously there's something about that disc it's running away from me. But
I've got it on CD, Organization. I think I've got most of them now on CD.
Sure.
They're touring over here, this year, or they're supposed to be.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know if that will work out for this year.
No, I know. Well, they're supposed to be headlining the 80s festival that we go to every year this year, but I can't see that happening because it's on June the 26th, and they're saying that we're going to be completely out of lockdown on the 21st of June. But I don't know whether we're going to even bother going, because even if I don't think it's going to happen, but even if it did, I don't think we'd feel too comfortable going to a...
Yeah, and also this is a projection. You don't know what's going to be happening when that time comes.
But yeah, they're supposed to be touring again this year over here with Scritti Politti.
Oh, wow. It's everyone's coming back. That'd be a great show to see.
Well, we're going to see we're supposed to be going to see Scritti Politti because they're doing Cupid and Psyche in full, doing the full album.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I wish it was the one before it, but I like Cupid Psyche, but Songs to Remember is one of my favorite albums of the 80s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because we saw Scritti Politti at the Big Chill Festival in the mid-2000s when they brought out an album called Black Beer and White Bread. Or is
Yeah,
it white?
I remember that.
Yeah. So we saw them then.
And how were they?
They were good. They concentrated on that one album. And I think they did The Sweetest Girl at the end, and that was about it.
Oh, okay.
But they were stood next to us when we were getting a beer before the gig, before they went on.
Isn't Green like 7 foot tall?
Yeah, he was like stood next to me, but I didn't say anything to him.
Kind of hard to miss.
My God, that was Green.
Yeah.
He's not that. I mean, he's fairly tall. Yeah, about 6 foot something.
Yeah.
But then, and the thing that also made it obvious that it was them is that he was wearing a Scritti Politti t-shirt.
Advertising.
Yeah. So anyway, back to OMD.
Enola Gay, the single from Organization, which I believe is like one of their biggest British hits.
Yeah, I think
that
so.
tune I knew well, and you may remember do you remember how I got a copy of that movie, A Music War, with all the different bands playing, and OMD are in that doing Enola Gay, and we used to watch that. Remember, we used to have video parties in the 80s?
Yeah, I forgot all about that film.
I actually have a burned copy from Warner's, who owns it. You can get burned copies, so I have a digital copy of that movie. I hadn't seen it in years, and I watched it a few times. It's great. It's great to see.
No, I'll have to... I wonder if somebody's put it on YouTube or something. I'll have to have a look.
Probably. It's fun to watch. That, I remember we used to watch that and The Tammy Show from 1964 and Pee Wee Herman's early club date.
Yeah.
And Liquid Sky and Female Trouble. John Waters' Female Trouble.
Yeah.
All from that time. So we've moved so they started in 80 and they had their first hits in 80, and in 81 is the year I always associate with sort of the synth pop really sort of breaking big, because you had the Human League Dare and it's Soft Cell, Tainted Love, and Depeche Mode's first album, and this all kind of blew up. And at the end of 81, OMD released Architecture and Morality, which is the album they were touring on for this gig.
Yeah.
Now, in England, it was a big hit right off the bat, and they had 3 big hits, Souvenir, Joan of Arc, and Maid of Orleans. Now, here in Canada, it did go on to become a very big hit, but it was a sleeper. And I remember that around the time of this show, Architecture and Morality was just starting to kind of pick up speed on the charts here. It was just starting to happen.
Uh-huh. I bought the cassette. I remember I had the cassette tape.
Were there any extra, sometimes they had extra tracks on the cassette. Was there anything like that?
I can't remember. I don't know whether, I don't think there was. Yeah, I don't think there was any, not that I can remember. I don't think so. There is on the CD, the remastered CD.
Cublet's got that. Yeah. Yes, Cublet's got that.
And I can remember as well, dancing. I had a Walkman or a similar kind of thing at the time. Or no, it was a friend of mine in school had one, and we danced to it in the hallway of high school. I don't know which song we danced to, just down the hallway when everybody was sort of walking about. We both had headphones on. Somehow he had that double thing, I think. Must have done.
Double headphone jack.
Yeah.
It's interesting they had those features they had on some of the early electronics that they took off. I remember my dad bought the first VCR of anyone I knew, and they had an input plug, so you could actually dub audio over top of the video and stuff like that. Those sorts of things just went. They kind of took all that stuff off as they took off, but you could have fun with those sorts of things. So do you remember hearing about the gig at all? Did you have any memories of that, buying the ticket, anticipating the show, anything like that?
I think I probably saw it advertised in the free press, and I went with a bunch of kids from school. I was in the school play at the time, and so there was pretty much all of the cast because it wasn't like a big huge cast because it was a play about the making of a play. So there was only a handful of us, and we all went. I kind of got them into it. And they'd never, they were typical Canadian high school kids who, they'd not really, didn't really know who they were.
Mm-hmm.
So I played them and they were like, oh, this is really cool. So we all went. So we did our sort of, our play rehearsal. And then we went for something to eat at a restaurant. I think it was on Wellington Road, the main road as you're going sort of from the city centre down to the south.
Yeah.
Because in the south end towards the 401. And I remember it being really snowy that night. That day it was really, really badly snowing.
We're going to get to that in a moment.
Okay. All right.
That's one of my big memories. But anyway.
So this was one thing I remember is when we were at the meal, we were sat waiting. I don't know whether we were eating or we were waiting, but I turned around and a few tables down was OMD.
Oh, you're kidding. That's cool.
No.
You never told me this. Wow.
Didn't I?
No, you've never told me this before. Very cool.
I
Is
know,
there
I was
more to
like,
that? They were there?
They were there eating, yeah. And I was like, I was really surprised to see them because, I thought, oh, they would have been at Centennial Hall by that point. But no, they were sort of having something to eat. And I was like, oh my God, there's the band. And
Okay,
one of the guys...
This is before the gig then?
Yeah, before.
Okay.
And then I think one of my friends from school said, well, go over and say something. I said, no, I'm not going to go over and say, wouldn't be cool.
Yeah.
So, but one of them, he went to the toilet and he came back and looked over and he said something to them or something. So they waved.
Oh, well, that was nice of them.
They just kind of waved and smiled, but it looked kind of forced.
Well, you had a lot of people waving at you. It was Catherine O'Hara this time. This time OMD are waving at you, or were you collecting waves?
Yeah, that was my hobby, didn't I tell you?
Yeah, getting waves from people. Some people wanted autographs. Some people just do the waves, and they could do like the royal wave, like the Queen does, and
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't look very happy. They looked kind of forced to. Andy McCluskey kind of forced a smile and waved. But, they probably weren't too happy with being in Canada when it was really bad snow.
Well, my next thing I was going to say is this gig is notable to me because this is the number one gig, the number one most frustrating gig ever to get into. Do you recall what happened early in the evening before the show?
No. I was worried it was going to get cancelled.
Okay, you know what? I actually had forgotten that we'd gotten a ton of snow. That part I'd forgotten. What I did remember is this. I went to the gig with Lady B and Le Chateau. Now, I had been seeing gigs in years previous, as this series can attain to, and Lady B I'd known for a few years, and she was into music, but she really wasn't into gig going initially until we went to Police Picnic 81. And so that kind of got her into going to gigs. So at this point, she had heard OMD. She kind of knew a bit. I think I played her a few songs, but she didn't really know them that well. But she was into going. It was a new band from Britain. And we had just met Le Chateau a few months previous. It's weird, we all went to the same high school.
Yeah.
But we didn't really know each other then. And we had been to something a few months before, and we met, a bunch of us were out, and then we met a bunch of other people, and we just kind of ended up hanging out. And it sort of emerged from then. Now, the weird thing is that he was very sort of, in terms of how he dressed, very new wave looking. Mm-hmm. But he really was just, in terms of what he was listening to when I first met him, it was just the stuff on the radio. So he had the look, but it was just, North American, Canadian radio pop. So he really wasn't listening to any of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they came along. They said, okay, we'll check this out. And we got the tickets in advance. I don't know if you remember, the tickets up on the website. The ticket for this gig is beautiful. It's a very, very unique ticket. It's about 2-3 times the size of a normal ticket. And it's on this nice gray paper with a picture of the band and really nice font. It's a beautifully laid out ticket.
I can't remember that.
Check out the website. I've got the ticket up there.
Yeah.
It's one of the most unique concert tickets I have. Whoever printed that up here did a beautiful job. It's almost like an invitation than a ticket. Oh. And we went, and of course there had been, what am I talking about? Of course I remember the snowfall, because there had been a massive snowfall the day and the night before. The night before they had played Kitchener, Ontario, mm-hmm. Kitchener-Waterloo, which is about an hour north. It's dead center between us and Toronto. And the doors opened at 8, and we got there because we wanted to get right up near the front. Yeah. And so we arrived at 8 o'clock, and the doors were closed. And what it was is it was an absolutely freezing night, sub-zero night. And But of course, and for those listeners who aren't in a northern climate or not in Canada, in the middle of winter, you have to get dressed up. Layers of clothes, the whole thing. If you're going to be inside at a concert or something like that, you don't want to be carrying that around. So our modus operandi for the evening, and that was fairly common, is we'll leave all our warm clothes in the car. We can just walk to the car and just a few feet to the door, and we're there. So I had just like winklepickers on, not winter boots, and, like tight black jeans and a jacket and a shirt. And so, because we're just going to wander in, normally that just makes sense. That makes sense. So we get up to the door, and there's a big sign on the door saying the concert will be going ahead tonight. It's going to happen, but because of all the snow, there's been delays, and the band are just getting set up. There's going to be a delay. So that could be one of the reasons. Exactly. Well, no, it wasn't they were eating. They were probably eating because all the equipment was delayed. It was an equipment
that's probably
delay.
Yeah.
They had time to kill. That's why they were eating. And so we thought, okay, well, the door's going to be open 10, 15 minutes late. We'll stand here. We're kind of shivering.
Yeah.
It was almost 2 hours. It was almost 2. And it's like, people were leaving, and it was this thing where luckily in some ways, we lucked out because we were at the front, so we had the crowd around us trying to push up against the door. So we did have some warmth from humans around us, but it's this thing where you're waiting and waiting, and you've already waited so long, you're thinking, well, if I go back now, I've waited for nothing, and it went on forever. It was almost 2 hours.
I can't remember getting there, though. That's strange. Yeah, go on, sorry.
Oh, this is the part of the evening I remember more than anything else. It was, and the doors finally opened. I think it was just under 2 hours. It was forever. And we got in, and I remember having no feeling in my toes, just no feeling, and it just frozen solid.
Yeah.
And it was probably, so we got there at 8. So it was probably around 10 before we went in. Mm-hmm. And the opening act was Mettle. Do you remember that? Mettle.
Yeah, I remember that. I was going to say, I thought it was possibly them. Weren't they still doing their sound check when they let the crowd in?
Probably. Because it just went on forever, and it was just so cold. I can't remember. Probably I can't remember because my brain was frozen by the time we got in there.
Yeah.
So they very well could have been. I know that everything happened really quickly once we got in. Like, wasn't too long for a Mettle run. And I think now that you say that, I have vague memories of my defrosting brain. Them doing their set, and pretty much just went right into the set. But I thought they were really good.
Mm-hmm.
And they put out an EP, a 6-track EP, which on the local university station, CHRW, which I remember young, they used to play that all the time. And I have the EP on tape, and I listened to it not too long ago. It's really good.
I remember liking them because I'd seen them again after that in Thrive Vocals. I'm sure I did. But yeah, I remember thinking that they were good.
And they were the first band I can remember from the London scene to sort of start incorporating electronics. And it was Rob Brent's band from the Demics. He'd been in the Demics.
Mm,
Anyway, I thought they were really good. That's my memory of them, is that they were really
yeah.
good.
Mm.
Do you have any additional memories?
Of them there,
Yeah.
no.
Okay. Okay. So,
I can, but to be honest as well, I can remember seeing, but with OMD though, I can't remember any of the songs. I remember watching them, and because
yeah.
I was like really looking forward to it because I thought I'd never seen them. I was interested to see how electronic music was going to sound like live because it didn't, I didn't know how, what it was going to look like or sound like.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, that's when the electronic bands were emerging, because before that it'd been mostly prog stuff.
Yeah.
Where people had been playing these, first off, inordinately expensive synthesizers and also, it was very difficult to transport. And the big thing was around this time, synthesizers got cheaper and more compact.
Mm-hmm.
So you could take almost like a punk rock approach to playing a synthesizer type of thing. And that's when these bands went boom.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember thinking that as well. It's all synthesizer. And it's interesting because, and I've thought about this, through the years I've seen a number of electronic bands live, and often the shows are amazing because there's more of a performance aspect. But there's a bunch I was thinking of, like Depeche Mode, Churches, Ladytron, Austra. They're a Canadian band.
Yeah.
I've seen, and they've had great live shows. And that was the case with OMD as well. So Mettle came on, they played, and again, I remember everything happening very quickly because it was super late. And I think Mettle played for like 40 minutes, half hour, 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it was very long after that before OMD were on. I remember thinking I dragged these two people here, and I don't think Le Chateau knew them at all. And Lady B was getting kind of frustrated. I thought, oh man, they better be good. And because the album was just starting to move up the charts here, and it was a cold night, there was only about 800. I remember about 800 people being. The part of the show I remember the most is the beginning, because they came on and they did Sealand from Architecture and Morality, that last track on that last slow track on the end of side one. And the lighting, it was almost like dark lighting. You could barely see them on the stage. And we got up and we were standing, pretty much everyone got up and went to the front, and we were right at the front. And they played this long sort of slow track in almost near darkness. And it was like, oh, I hope the rest of the night isn't going to be this slow. And that ended, the lights came up, and from there on in, right through to the end, it was just pure adrenaline, mostly from Andy McCluskey. He was energy incarnate. That's my memory from the evening.
Yeah, I remember that. I do remember him dancing around, and it was all over the place.
Because the others were sort of stuck behind their instruments.
Yeah.
He was the front person, but he was an amazing front person. It was just, he didn't stop, and he was playing the whole time. He's playing bass the whole time.
I've got recently I've got a little bit of a connection to OMD.
Which is?
Well, there's one of the caretakers at one of our other sites. This is at work, by the way. Mm-hmm. He came over when there wasn't a caretaker at my site. He came over and to do some work at our place. And he was saying that his best friend, this girl he was best friends with at school, is married to the drummer of OMD. Because he sort of bumped into her. I hadn't seen her for quite a long time. Bumped into her, and I don't know whether it was in the middle of Liverpool. And he said, he said, I'll give you a lift home, because she had some shopping. She said, all right, okay. And they pulled up in, this huge house. He was like, oh, why you've got such a big house? It's like, oh, well, yeah, my husband is the drummer of OMD.
Not because I think I recall hearing the original. I know at one point a few years ago they connected with that original four-piece band we saw in
Yeah.
1982.
So I don't know whether he was the original drummer, this guy, but he drummed with them, and I think he wrote some of the songs. I think some of the later songs.
Ah, very cool, very cool.
Yeah. So.
Do you have any memories about the actual show when they were on stage performing? Anything that comes back to you?
No, I remember. I remember being at the front.
Yeah.
And
Where in the front were you? We were at the front. If you're looking at the stage, more the left
I
side.
think I was on the left. I was on the left. I'm sure you said that you'd seen me there.
You had mentioned that. I'm sure I did. I unfortunately can't remember that, but I'm sure I did.
I remember you saying, because I had a Specials t-shirt on, and you liked. Did you have a Funboy 3 t-shirt on?
Not that night, but I got the Funboy 3 t-shirt later that year. Because I remember because we met about a year after this.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying that as you had seen me wearing the Funboy 3 t-shirt. So there's obviously, you had the Specials on. I was wearing Funboy 3, so there's some two-tone connection in there.
Yeah. I remember that. And I remember my friends from school, they really got into it, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. They were like really stoked about it afterwards. But I can't remember any of the songs.
When I wrote this initially, because I wrote the blog entry back in 2010, I put the set pulled largely from Architecture and Morality, as well as earlier tunes such as Enola Gay, Messages, and Electricity. So that's what I remember 10 years ago. That's gone from my mind now.
It was a good thing you'd written it down 10 years ago.
Especially with everything that's gone on in my life for the last 10 years. Unfortunately, some of my memory has been erased.
Same here.
I think it's a combination of getting older, but also just the crap that's been happening in the world, certainly in my life. But luckily, I mean, I'm so happy because I wrote these 10 years ago, and there's a whole bunch of things in them I've forgotten since. And then there's a chunk of time coming up where I kept journals, and it also coincided with when I was seeing the most number of concerts. So I've got lots of details then. And of course, any show from 2010 onwards, I've got notes. So luckily, some of the gaps have been plugged. Now, you were saying that the people you went with, they were really into the show. That was the same thing at my end as well. Both Lady B and Le Chateau absolutely loved them. It was instant fandom. The next day, they were out buying their records. That was pretty much it. Over the next few years, that was one of my favorite. They remained one of my favorite bands, and certainly in our circle, that was one of the bands everyone was listening to in the next few years.
Yeah, and it's still. I mean, when you listen back to Architecture and Morality, especially, I think I appreciate it more now than I did then.
Why do you think that may be?
I don't know. Because I can probably appreciate the more slower stuff on it now.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably might have been a bit more interested in the more upbeat stuff at the time, when I was younger. So, but I can appreciate the production value. You can hear it. You can hear, I think, a big difference from the first two albums to that album.
Yeah, you really got a sense that, although I still have a big passion for the first one, but Architecture and Morality was that. It's the same thing with a lot of bands when they hit their third album, because you have like the first one that's come out of, you basically, there's the whole thing. You have your whole life to make your first album.
Yeah.
The second one's a bit of a rush job. It's usually the third album that's a bellwether of whether it was a flash in the pan or they're going to continue. And they really solidified and expanded on everything they had done with that third album.
Yeah.
And it was cool, too, because, again, it was here in Canada. That ended up being a very big album. That really broke them here. And so it was neat to also see, again, some of the bands that I'd been listening to, gaining success and getting popular because I felt they deserved it. So that was very cool as well.
Yeah, I agree. But it's still, when I listen back and I think it doesn't sound like it's being a hit album. It's not one where you can say, oh, it's got loads of hit singles, although it had a few.
Yeah.
Over here, it had a few hit singles.
3.
Yeah, but you wouldn't it's kind of out there in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because there's some of the longer, slower tracks that weren't really there on the earlier albums.
Mm, yeah.
I actually hadn't heard that album or any of their albums in a number of years, because in the latter half of the 80s, I wasn't as big on what they were doing, and I kind of got out of listening to them. And as with a lot of things, when you listen to a lot of music, you kind of maybe take a breather from stuff. And when I met Cublet in 98, of course, he is Mr. 80s. That's his big thing, and OMD is one of his favorite bands. So he started going back and getting all the CDs he didn't have, and I started re-listening to them. Mm-hmm. And I was, especially the early ones, I was struck by how fresh they were. But what you were saying about architectural morality, I had kind of a similar thing as well. As, in some ways, this is a really odd album to have been their breakthrough, because it did have some had the catchy hits, that's why, but some of the other stuff was a little more challenging than on the first two. Mm-hmm. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So it was a freezing night. It was the worst wait I've ever had to get into a gig. This one, it shares some DNA with a Prince gig that I went to in 2010, which was also a nightmare, but for different reasons. Well, slightly different reasons, and there was a bit of a wait. But this night was a real pain. It was awful. It took forever to get in, but I feel that, they were real troopers. They came out, they played their whole show, they gave it their all, and everyone there really, really connected. I think that night it was a small audience, but the band and the audience really connected, and it was just all this adversity to make it happen. And when it did, I mean, they're going on at almost 11 o'clock at night, when most concert halls are shutting down. They brought it. It was great. It was just an amazing evening, and I had a lot of respect that they came in and played that late show and did a great job.
It's funny because I'd forgotten that they came on so late. They kind of flashbacks about, because one of the guys from school, he had a car, so he kind of drove us all back home. But I think I do have flashbacks vaguely about getting in the car and thinking, oh God, it's really late. Are we going to get into trouble?
Well, the next morning, both Lady B and Le Chateau had to work, so it was a late night.
Yeah.
But afterwards, I think the concert ended at 12:30 or something like that. And we were so pumped up from the show and the dancing and so energized. And also because we'd been there for so long, we were starving. So the three of us went down to Mother's Pizza on Richmond. Do you remember Mother's Pizza?
Yeah.
And it was open till 1 because there was a bar, and it was us. And we just sat there, I think, polishing off some beer and inhaling a pizza because we were so hungry, and just closed the place and then went home. But that's also my memory after. And for those of you who didn't know Mother's, they were a Ontario pizza chain that I used to love going to, not only for the pizza, but it was done in a 20s style decor, and on all of the walls, they were just wall to wall, floor to ceiling stills from Hollywood movies from the 20s. And I used to love looking at all the stills on the wall.
But then there was a big one, I think, on Wellington Road that had a screen that would show silent sort of films like Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin.
That's the one we went to. No. This is Richmond Street. One I don't know. Where was this on Wellington, in the south end of the city?
Wellington. Yeah, it was close to the restaurant that we went to where I saw OMD, which I can't remember. I remember that was kind of round shaped, that restaurant, this OMD. And then I remember there was Mother's, there was a A&W. I think it was close to where the CJBK offices used to be, where that used to be.
Oh, okay, that end of the city.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that. Because, of course, I grew up in the Northeast, so I wasn't in that section of the city.
That's where I grew up.
Yeah, you're in the polar opposite end of the city.
I know. Which makes it amazing that we actually met up, but then it was the whole music scene in the downtown area that sort of brought us together as friends.
Well, I see it as that downtown scene was the magnet for all the sort of weirdo people from every neighborhood in the city where it's like, get me out of here. Everyone came downtown and we all found each other.
Yeah. Okay, because I can remember it still being, I was still at school down in that South End when I was going out, and I met all these people, and I thought, I've got all these friends that I'm not at school with, because everybody I knew at school only knew people from the neighborhood or from school.
Yeah.
Nobody went downtown and met people from the North End or anywhere else.
Yeah, and that's kind of how everyone, like, there was a downtown. London, Ontario today is so sad. There's the downtown. It's like a ghost town, which is what the city actively worked to have happen for many, destroy the downtown. I know that for sure. And they were successful. It's literally, it's so sad. It is so sad what it is. It's just, anyway.
Yeah.
So that pretty much wraps up our look back at the OMD show from 1982, March of 1982. I think we can both agree we had a great time, and they really put on a great show.
Yes.
So thanks once again, special guests, for dropping by and sharing your memories. And you will be...
pleasure as always.
And love having you back. And you'll be back next time for Police Picnic 82.
I look forward to it.
Which, you had a very nice time, and this was the worst concert experience of my entire life.
I look forward to it.
Well, as I said, it's going to make for a fun and entertaining episode, but it was pure torture living through it, I can assure you. Talk to you next time, special guests.
I look forward to it.
Well, this wraps up episode 16 and my look back at this terrific OMD show that took place here in London, Ontario in March of 1982. Join me next time as the series skips ahead 5 months to what will be one of the most interesting and entertaining live concert stories I'll be telling you. And it took place on Friday the 13th, 1982, and boy, did that Friday the 13th live up to its reputation, at least for me and the three of us who went. Dear listeners, I welcome you to come back next time and relive with me the worst concert experience of my entire life. Episode 17, number 11, what a day that was. Police Picnic 82, with the Police, Talking Heads, The Beat, or the English Beat as they were called over here, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, A Flock of Seagulls, and the Spoons, at CNE Stadium, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, Friday, August 13th, 1982. And there was a poster for the show, and I have this posted up as part of the blog entry. And the poster reads, because it was Friday the 13th, make this your lucky night. Yeah, right. While Police Picnic 81 was a fairly sober and orderly experience for us, the 82 edition felt like a sadistic joke that wouldn't stop. It was a day of being trolled by the concert gods. And this show joins the Heatwave Festival, which was podcast episode 10, as eventful, to say the least. Just this time it was a whole lot less pleasant. Now, on the upside, the Talking Heads once again completely blew me away as they had at Heatwave, and the Police were radically improved from the 81 edition. Even the day's one truly great piece of luck came with a big, big negative. It was also my first time at the now long-gone CNE Stadium, the mega venue in downtown Toronto. Now, when the whole stadium was being used, as it was on this day, it held about 60,000 people. When it was used in its CNE grandstand configuration, it was more of about 20,000. Anyway, as the series goes on, there's going to be a number of shows from either the CNE Stadium or grandstand that I saw that I'll be talking about, including gigs by The Clash, David Bowie, Bob Dylan, and the Rolling Stones. So that's all coming in the years ahead. But for now and next time, join me in this delightful descent into festival misery and humiliation. Stay tuned for bad drugs, bad sound, obnoxious neighbors, pointless preparations, naive assumptions, swollen bladders, and a nightmare bus ride. Once again, what a day that was. Episode 17, Police Picnic 82, coming up next time. Highly recommend coming back. Also, there's a detailed blog entry on the mylifeinconcert.com site if you want to read ahead. And special guest will be returning once again. He was also at the festival, and he'll be sharing his more positive memories of the day. Thank you once again for listening. Remember to check out the mylifeinconcert.com blog, as well as our YouTube channel and Facebook and Instagram pages, and the Spotify playlists as well. If you were at any of the shows I've been podcasting or writing about, please leave your memories of the concert on the blog or the YouTube channel. I'm your host, Various Artists, signing off. Let's meet up at the next gig. Bye for now.